London, 1381. The richest city in England is burning. Smoke rolls through the streets. Bells ring in panic. Stone prisons are torn open. Royal records, debts, laws, obligations are dragged into the streets and fed to the flames. And marching through the chaos are men who were never meant to be here. Peasants, farm laborers, village craftsmen, men who their entire lives had been ordered to bow, kneel, and obey. Now they are armed, and they are not begging. They have come to punish. For the first time in medieval European history, the lowest class in society has seized the capital of a kingdom. They are hunting the king's officials. They are executing judges. They are dragging nobles from hiding places and cutting their heads off in public. And somewhere behind the walls of the Tower of London, a 14-year-old king listens as the mob chants for justice. Not revolution, justice. This is the moment Europe will never forget, because for centuries, kings ruled by divine right. Authority flowed downward from god to crown to noble to peasant. That order was not supposed to bend, and it was never supposed to break. But in the summer of 1381, something unthinkable happens. The king rides out to meet the mob, face to face, alone. What forces a medieval king to negotiate with peasants? What terror grips the ruling class so deeply that the crown itself is forced into submission? And how did a society built on obedience suddenly explode into open defiance? To understand how peasants nearly destroyed royal authority, you have to understand the world that crushed them first. Because this revolt does not begin with weapons, it begins with death. Decades earlier, the Black Death tears through Europe like a scythe. Villages vanish, fields go untended. In England, nearly half the population disappears. And when the plague finally loosens its grip, the survivors discover something dangerous. They are needed. With labor scarce, peasants demand higher wages. They move freely, they refuse old obligations. For the first time in generations, common people feel leverage. The ruling class panics. Parliament responds with laws designed to freeze society in place: wage caps, labor restrictions, punishments for anyone who refuses to work at pre-plague levels. Freedom is rolled back by force. Then come the taxes, not land taxes, not noble taxes, but poll taxes, flat payments demanded from every adult, rich or poor. Once, then again. Then again, each time harsher than the last. Tax collectors arrive in villages backed by soldiers. They interrogate families. They inspect young women to determine age. They humiliate. They threaten. They take what little remains. To the peasantry, it feels less like taxation and more like punishment for surviving the plague. And everywhere the same belief spreads. The king does not know. Surely the king would never allow this. Surely corrupt officials are lying to him. Because in the medieval imagination, the king is not just a ruler, he is supposed to be a protector. That illusion will soon be tested. In the spring of 1381, a tax collector arrives in a small village. He does not leave. He is beaten, chased out, and sent fleeing for his life. Word spreads. Villages begin refusing payment. Collectors are assaulted. Records are destroyed. Men who have never held swords begin organizing. They march not as a mob, but as columns. They choose leaders. They swear oaths, and at their head emerges a man history will never fully understand: Wat Tyler. He is not a noble, not a knight, not a lord, but he speaks with authority. He enforces discipline. He keeps order. And under his leadership, thousands begin marching toward London, not to beg, not to plead, but to confront the crown itself. By the time the rebels reach the outskirts of the capital, the impossible has already happened. England's peasantry has become an army. And the king is about to meet them. By early June, the roads leading to London are filled with men carrying farming tools sharpened into weapons: bills, axes, staves, bows pulled from village stores. They march under banners painted with crude symbols of justice and saints. They move with purpose. Villages along the way open their doors, not in fear, but in support. Food is given freely. More men join the columns. This is no longer a local riot. It is a national movement. Inside London, panic spreads faster than the rebels themselves. The city is overcrowded, tense, divided. Merchants fear ruin, nobles fear death. The royal council argues, hesitates, delays. Soldiers are scarce. The army is scattered overseas. There is no force ready to stop what is coming. And then something extraordinary happens. The gates of London open, not broken down, not stormed, open from within. Sympathetic townsmen, artisans, apprentices, laborers swing them wide. The rebels pour into the richest city in England without a fight. The unthinkable has become reality. Peasants now control the capital. What follows is not random violence, it is targeted. The rebels march directly to symbols of oppression. Legal courts, tax offices, manorial records, anything that binds a man to debt or servitude is seized and destroyed. Parchment burns, centuries of obligation turn to ash. Then the executions begin. Judges are dragged into the streets. Tax officials are hunted down. Men who once spoke with royal authority are forced to kneel before crowds that had been silent all their lives. Heads fall, one after another. The message is unmistakable. This is not against the king. This is against those who rule in his name. The most shocking moment comes at the Tower of London, the fortress that symbolizes royal power, the safest place in the kingdom. Its gates open. Inside, some of the highest officials in England are hiding, including the Archbishop of Canterbury, the king's chief advisor, and the man many rebels blame for their suffering. He is dragged outside. There is no trial, no mercy. In front of the people, he is beheaded. When the blade falls, something far more important dies with him, the illusion of untouchable authority. News spreads like wildfire across Europe. Peasants have entered the tower. Peasants have executed the king's ministers. Peasants control London, and the king is still alive, still inside the city, still silent, 14 years old, trapped between a mob and a ruling class that can no longer protect him. At last, the king agrees to meet them, not behind walls, not through messengers, but in person. At Mile End, just outside the city, the boy king rides out accompanied by a small retinue. No army, no shield wall, no force capable of saving him if the crowd turns violent. Thousands of peasants stand before him, dirty, armed, furious, and yet they kneel. They kneel because they still believe. They believe the king has been misled. They believe justice can be restored. They believe that if he only hears them, everything can change. They present their demands: an end to serfdom, freedom to sell labor at fair wages, the abolition of unjust taxes, the removal of corrupt officials. And the king does something no medieval ruler was ever supposed to do. He agrees. Charters are written, promises are spoken aloud. Freedom granted by royal word. The crowd erupts, men weep, they cheer, they shout the king's name. For a brief, fragile moment, it seems the world has changed. Groups of rebels begin to leave the city, believing they have won, but not all of them. Wat Tyler remains. He knows something is wrong. Promises are easy. Power is not surrendered so simply. And so the next day, the rebels demand a second meeting, this time at Smithfield, this time closer. More tense, more dangerous, and this is where everything breaks. Smithfield, June 15, 1381. The air is heavy with suspicion. On one side, thousands of peasants stand packed together, weapons in hand, watching every movement of the king's entourage. On the other, the royal party advances slowly, the young king, his advisors, and a small group of armed men trying to look calm while calculating every possible escape. There is no cheering now, no kneeling, only silence. Wat Tyler rides forward to speak. Accounts differ on what happens next, but every version agrees on one thing: this moment changes everything. Tyler demands that the king's promises be expanded, not just freedom from serfdom, but equality before the law, an end to noble privilege, justice for common men as well as lords. To the ruling class, this is no longer negotiation. It is a threat. Words are exchanged, voices rise. Tyler gestures. A royal official accuses him of insolence. Another calls him a traitor, then steel flashes, a blade is drawn. In an instant, Wat Tyler is struck down, wounded, dragged from his horse, cut again. He collapses on the ground, bleeding, dying in the dirt. The rebel army freezes. For a heartbeat, no one moves. Thousands of armed men stare at the body of their leader. This is the moment when England should collapse into civil war. The king is exposed. His guards are outnumbered. One command from the crowd, one surge forward, and the monarchy ends right here. But then the boy king does something no one expects. Richard rides forward. He places himself between the rebels and his own men, and he speaks, "I am your captain now." A 14-year-old child stares down thousands of armed peasants and claims command of their rebellion. It should not work, but it does, because kingship still carries weight, because tradition still binds, because in the chaos the rebels hesitate. They want justice, not anarchy. They want the king, not his blood. Slowly, unbelievably, they lower their weapons. Richard orders them to follow him, and they obey. Wat Tyler dies believing the cause may yet survive him. The rebels are led away from Smithfield, dispersed, promised that their demands will be fulfilled. But the moment they leave, the spell is broken. The royal council regains control. Soldiers are summoned, sheriffs are unleashed, and the king's promises begin to evaporate. The charters granting freedom are declared invalid, the revolt is labeled treason, and the hunt begins. Village by village, rebel leaders are tracked down, some are dragged from their homes, others are betrayed by neighbors seeking mercy. Executions follow, public, brutal, final. Bodies hang from gallows as warnings, heads are mounted on city gates. The message is clear, the crown has forgiven nothing. Within weeks, the rebellion is crushed. On paper, the king has won, order is restored, authority reasserted. The ruling class breathes again, but beneath the surface, something has changed forever. Because kings now know something they never knew before, the people can rise, and when they do, the crown can tremble. The executions do not stop the fear, they spread it. Across England, rumors race ahead of the gallows. Lords lock their gates, manors raise walls, nobles travel with guards they never needed before. Because the rebellion may be /d-break, but the lesson is burned into memory. The Commons had marched on the capital, they had entered the Tower. They had forced the king to speak as an equal, and no amount of punishment can erase that. Abroad, word of the uprising crosses borders and courts. Chroniclers in France, the Low Countries, and the Holy Roman Empire write of England with disbelief. Peasants had dictated terms. Peasants had made a king retreat. Every ruling class in Europe recognizes the danger. If it could happen in England, it could happen anywhere. Governments respond not with mercy, but with caution. Taxes are reconsidered. Reforms are discussed in whispers. Lords hesitate before pushing too far, knowing how thin the line truly is. And in England, despite the official verdict of treason, change creeps in quietly. Poll taxes are never attempted again. Serfdom begins to rot from the inside. Labor laws become harder to enforce. Lords find it increasingly difficult to bind men who now know they can resist. The old order does not fall overnight, but it no longer stands unchallenged. The boy king grows into a man who never forgets what happened in 1381. He rules with suspicion. He surrounds himself with favorites. He rules defensively, always aware of how quickly authority can dissolve. Years later, when he himself is overthrown, few are surprised. The crown had already shown it could be shaken. The rebellion leaves no monuments, no victory songs, no official heroes. But it leaves something far more dangerous, a memory carried in villages, passed in whispers, retold by fathers to sons, a memory of a time when peasants seized London, when officials fled, when a king had to listen. They did not kill the king, but they killed the illusion that he was untouchable, and once that illusion dies, it never truly returns, because after 1381, every ruler in Europe knows one truth: crowns do not rest on divine right alone, they rest on consent. And fear, history remembers victories. It remembers crowns won on battlefields, empires carved out by steel, kings who expanded borders and ruled for decades. What it rarely remembers are moments like this. Moments where nothing officially changes, yet everything is different. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381 does not end with a new dynasty. It does not create a republic. It does not abolish monarchy or overturn the social order in a single dramatic stroke. And yet, after it happens, medieval Europe is never the same again, because power, once exposed, can never fully hide. For centuries before 1381, the relationship between ruler and ruled had been simple. The king commanded, the nobility enforced, the peasantry obeyed. Resistance existed, but it was local, isolated, easily crushed. No one believed that the lowest people in society could act together across regions with discipline and purpose. That belief dies in London. The ruling class had told itself a comforting story that peasants were ignorant, passive, incapable of coordinated action, that they could be taxed, controlled, and coerced indefinitely, so long as force existed to back it up. 1381 proves that story is a lie. The rebels do not stumble into London by accident. They march there deliberately. They target institutions, not random victims. They destroy records instead of hoarding wealth. They articulate demands that are radical, coherent, and deeply threatening to the foundations of feudal society. This terrifies Europe's elites far more than mindless violence ever could, because violence can be crushed, ideas cannot. The idea that common people can organize themselves, the idea that authority can be challenged openly, the idea that a king might be forced to negotiate. These ideas do not die on the gallows, they sink into the soil. In England, lords quietly adapt. They begin commuting labor services for rent. They rely more on wage labor. They compromise where once they would have punished, not out of kindness but calculation. They have seen what happens when pressure builds too far. Serfdom does not end immediately, but it weakens, and within a century it is largely gone from England not by decree but by erosion. In other parts of Europe, rulers take note. In France, where memory of the Jacquerie still lingers, repression hardens. In the German lands, princes reinforce authority. In Eastern Europe, where elites believe control must be absolute to prevent revolt, serfdom actually intensifies. Different responses, same fear. The lesson is universal. The lower orders are not powerless. They are restrained until they are not. Even the church absorbs the shock. Clergy had long preached obedience as divine law. Now they confront the reality that hunger, taxation, and humiliation can outweigh theology. A sermon cannot feed a family, a doctrine cannot stop a blade. The moral authority of institutions begins to fray, and then there is the king himself. Richard II survives the revolt, but he never escapes it. He grows into a ruler obsessed with control, dignity, and image. He demands loyalty. He punishes dissent. He elevates favorites and sidelines traditional power structures, perhaps believing that old elites failed him when he needed them most. In trying to secure his authority, he isolates himself, and in the end he is overthrown not by peasants, but by nobles who have learned, just as the commons did, that kings can fall. That is the final irony of 1381. The revolt that does not kill a king ultimately helps make regicide thinkable, not immediately, not directly, but irreversibly. Because once a ruler has been forced to plead, promise, and retreat, the aura of inevitability is gone. Power becomes conditional. And conditional power is fragile. Centuries later, when revolutions erupt in England, in France, and across Europe, they do not cite Wat Tyler by name, but they echo his demands: fair law, economic justice, limits on authority. The idea that rulers exist for the people, not the other way around, that idea does not begin in palaces. It begins in moments like this, when ordinary men step beyond the roles assigned to them, when fear changes sides. When the crown trembles not because it has fallen, but because it could. The peasants of 1381 return to their villages bloodied, hunted, and defeated, but they return changed. They have seen London. They have seen officials beg. They have seen a king promise freedom. No execution can erase that knowledge, and knowledge is dangerous, because once people understand that the world they live in is constructed, enforced by law, custom, and violence, they also understand that it can be resisted. Not always successfully, not without cost, but never again unthinkable. That is why Europe was shocked, not because peasants marched, not because officials died, but because the foundation cracked and everyone heard it. They did not kill the king, they did something far worse. They proved that he was human, and once that truth is revealed, history can never go back to pretending otherwise.